Musar, Mr. Smith, myself, Bernard Parks as chair. Let me go through our consent calendar first for those who may have items of interest that we can resolve those early on. Colleagues, if we can move item 6, item 8, item 9, item 13, 14, 16, 17, and 18 on consent.
Yeah, I did have just one question on 16, so.
We'll hold 16 then.
See, I don't have it.
We'll hold, Jose, you said a no? Are you agree?
Fine, yeah.
Fine.
Which ones did we?
Okay, Bill, we went 6, 8, 9, 13, 14, 17, and 18.
To get provincial, is anything in my district?
It was just that one, the computer was yours, and I know.
Which one are you talking about? That's no problem.
Okay, let me just go back on individually on number 6, that we will note and file the city attorney's report. And I just asked on 6, there's no questions about individual cases, but let me ask the city attorney in the future if we could get just a short synopsis so we know what the cases that are listed, what they entail. We have case numbers and names and dollars, but there's no way to determine what they're involved with. So on item 6, we just ask for that direction in the future. Number 8, we'll approve the joint CAO-CLA report, CAO City Attorney report. I would just ask if the city attorney can get with the committee clerk and for the narrative of that report, if you could identify new firms versus current firms that are working within this field. Also, if you could break down those that are headquartered in the city, those that have offices in the city, and those who might be minority or female firms. And then also, if you more clearly explain the payment structure and/or the source of payment to the firms.
Mr. Chair? Also, if we could get a list of each department by which these cases are risen from or are against, since we're going to hopefully, we talked about in our budget process, going through a department litigation budget for each department, we might want to start seeing each of the departments for each of these cases.
Okay.
On number 6, I'm sorry, going back to number 6 on them, yeah.
Okay, that's in addition to 6, in addition to asking for a short synopsis, also the departments. Let's see. We've done number 8. Let's see, number 9, there's no, number 9, we'll accept the CLA's report. Number 13, on number 13, we will approve the motion, but I'd just like to ask for a report back from the city treasurer. We're saying that we authorize up to $5 million. I'd like to have her comment on whether that's an appropriate figure or should it be higher or lower, and want to clarify that we're not directing these deposits, we're authorizing a dollar figure. And then 14, we're accepting the controller's report. And let's see. 17, we're accepting the controller's report, and 18, the controller's report. I just would like to add on number 18 that we basically commend the CAO and those responsible in the sense that it's apparent that in 06, 07, and 07, 08 fiscal years that we borrowed or loaned only $453,000, where in previous years from 03 to 04 forward, it was over $9 million. So there's been some corrective action on loans from the reserve fund. So those are the ones we move forward with those directions. And what we'd like to do is, I understand that we have some people on the clock, that if we can go with number 21 and 15 combined and deal with the P3, we have some consultants that may be trying to get to a plane. And also we have the CLA and CAO who have some other business conflicts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Roy Morales with the CLA's office. And what you have before you is a report back from the CLA and the CAO. It's a joint report in response to a series of questions that were raised during the 09-10 budget deliberations. This is regarding the public-private partnership, the potential transaction on a set of our parking assets, which includes 10 parking garages and possibly includes our meters, our parking meters. And what came up before during the council deliberations was a proposal that set aside $3 million in the Capital Finance Administration Fund to fund the due diligence portion of a potential transaction. And as I mentioned earlier, during the deliberations, the council had questions as to what we would get for that investment, and asked that we report back with a smaller version of that in order to develop enough information to provide to the council that would allow you to consider in full the proposal and answer all your questions, because there's a series of questions that were raised. And before you is a proposal that would require an additional appropriation of $500,000 from 0809 on top of the 0809 appropriation for a total of $1 million. And we described for you what the city would receive from that investment, the main component being a study by a parking consultant with detailed information that provides us quite a bit of information on the demand for parking in the city of LA, what the consultant calls the elasticity of demand for parking in both our parking garages and our parking meters. This is the due diligence portion. What we'd like to do is provide you with adequate information, as I mentioned, to answer such questions as what would be the value on the potential transaction if we included a cap, for example, on meter rates, if we included restrictions on the hours of operation, if we required a certain amount of capital expenditure in our assets. If the council chose to include those provisions in any potential transaction, what would be the value, the anticipated value, if the council chose to put this on the street? Secondly, this report provides information in terms of the controller's involvement. There was specific instruction from 3 city council motions asking for oversight from our city controller to make sure that there's full transparency in the analysis. And I'm pleased to say that our city controller, Mr. Russ Cervantes, and his staff joined the parking team, the working group, is actively involved in the discussions, and the current controller, will be assigning staff to apply generally accepted accounting principles to oversee KPMG's analysis of current revenues. So they're actively involved. They will essentially be auditing the revenue analyses. Beyond that, it is a transaction that, as we mentioned, the city of Chicago tried and executed, and we recommend that we go forward with a very as I mentioned, transparent process, a due diligence process, where we will provide you with data that is collected by our consultants on the actual use of parking meters, the actual cost of our parking structures, all of the data that gives you a basis for determining if this is a feasible transaction. That data is currently being collected. It will be analyzed immediately thereafter, and staff will present a report to you with the findings, at which point you will have information on which to base your decisions.
Let me just start off with a couple of questions. Number one, in looking at the allocation of additional $500, does that then mean that the remaining 2.5 goes back to the Capital Finance Administration Fund, or does it stay in the UB, or what happens to the remaining 2.5?
During the 9-10 deliberations, the City Council moved $3 million from Cap Finance Administration to the UB. This would allocate $500,000 of that, leaving the remaining 2.5 in the UB.
Okay. But I mean, is it being that we believe that the financing for this study is $1 million, what would be our rationale for leaving the 2.5?
The financing, the initial allocation, this is in fact the initial allocation for the first portion of the analysis. We wanted to provide the City Council with enough information to get to a decision point. But, and I'll have to defer to this, to the CAO, and we also have our consultants available here in terms of the remaining expenses if and when that decision is made to go forward, what the additional expenses would be that would require an appropriation of all or a portion of the 2.5 million.
Okay. The thing that concerns me when I read the report, the CAO-CLA report, is that in portions of it, it hit right on what I thought was the point that scoped out that our main interest, I think, at the last council meeting was to study the current condition of our meter and parking structure. And when we go to page 4 and 5, it pretty well hits a number of those issues on the scope. Where it gets a little fuzzy is when we then in some paragraphs turn and basically appear that we are going to be justifying the P3 issue. And I thought it was two separate approaches, that the council wanted to clearly outline where they are and what the infrastructure was, what was the amount of meters, what we could do with them, and that it wasn't necessarily that they tied the two. Now, if they make a decision later to use that information to say, let's go look at P3, that's how I came out of the discussion. But I thought our fundamental purpose was to give them an assessment of our current inventory and what that inventory's value and things of that nature.
Okay. Sarai Baga from the CAO's office. To your first question, the remaining 2.5 million, that entire allocation was to cover both the assessment and execution. If the decision is made to go forward with the transaction, then that was to cover the additional expenses to go through the RFQ and RFP process to complete the transaction. The study, overall, the working group is looking at status quo basically in terms of how we operate and manage the parking system under the city's ownership. The second part of the study is going to look at taking those assumptions and what it would mean if we were to privatize those assets. So we're going to be looking at two scenarios and presenting that information to you to make a decision.
Okay. But I thought one of the assessments for the existing inventory was to determine where we are now and what we as a city can do if we enhance our equipment, enhance the dollar value. What could the city do with this resource before we got to phase 2 that you're saying?
Well, we're looking at them at the same time to present you with the information at the same time. So
we'll get a current evaluation and then what the city could do within its own resources before we get to the phase 2, which is, does it make sense to go to a P3?
yes,
So that's what we'll get back.
yes.
Okay. And then the other issue, just want to make sure of, and I don't know quite how to deal with this, in the evaluation, and many of us have access, and I don't know if it's the IG report from the state of Illinois or the IG report from the city of Chicago, how that gets incorporated into the study that you're going to produce. Is that?
We actually have our consultant available here, Ms. Lois Scott, who is with Scott Ballas Solutions, who is in fact intimately familiar with both the Chicago transaction and is our independent financial advisor for the city. Can probably provide good insight into both.
Thank you, and thank you for the adjustment on schedule. I appreciate it.
Just pull it plus.
Lois Scott with Scott Ballas Strategies. We served as independent valuation advisor to the Chicago Park District on the privatization of the parking structures. We were not involved in the parking meters transaction for the city of Chicago. The Inspector General of Chicago released a report earlier this spring, summer, that raised concerns in a couple of different areas. One was in operational areas, and one was in financial areas. In both of those areas, both topics, I think that the process that the City of Los Angeles is pursuing is entirely different from the way the City of Chicago is doing it. The City of Chicago has a very different governmental structure than LA, as you are aware. There's a very strong mayor form of government with 50 aldermen. A lot of transactions and work is done at the mayoral offices and then is presented to the City Council with a relatively short time for action. The Inspector General, who's a new position in the City of Chicago, has taken hold of that and has evaluated whether that's an appropriate way of deliberating on these issues. I did identify what some of the challenges are and cataloged what there was in that Inspector General report, and if you'd like me to briefly do that in a minute or two, I'm happy to do so.
I think you could do that, but the main concern I have is how does that get incorporated into your study?
We have shared with the City of Los Angeles Parking Meter Assessment Team our thoughts on how LA could avoid those mistakes. In writing, we provided that, and we could incorporate that by reference or as part of the methodology that we pursue.
So we will have something in your study that will comment on the shortfalls? And,
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And my final question on dealing with 15 is that do we really need to amend this ordinance now, or can we wait until the study and whether the council makes a decision to move forward?
This is on the SPRF amendment?
Dealing with expanding the usage of the SPRS. Right?
We basically now have authority to pay for financial advisors. What we don't have authority to pay for are the some of the accounting work that's being done with KPMG. We don't have authority to pay for the attorney that we've hired to help us iron out some of the issues that you're concerned about. So those are really what we're looking to help pay for. And you can see on, I think it's page 3, why we need to amend the ordinance to pay for those.
But what I got out of looking at the report is that $1 million comes out of the capital fund, and that's where the $1 million has the ability to pay for those functions. So I'm trying to find out why we have to change the ordinance now if we're funding it out of another fund.
Well, the actual cash is coming from the Special Parking Revenue Fund, and the instructions transfers the cash to the Capital Finance Administration Fund just for administrative purposes, because the CAO is the administrator of that fund, and it will facilitate since we are the ones executing the contracts. So it's really just serving as a pass-through. The actual funding source is SPRF. So the ordinance in that
So
case
you're
is...
saying we're, in order to use it when it comes out of the capital fund, we have to change the ordinance?
in order for it to be an eligible expenditure.
Well, I just have, no offense, please, but I think the Chicago experience was a total train wreck, and the people there are really having second thoughts about the whole thing that happened, and it wasn't your fault. It was the system there that failed, I think.
I wasn't involved on the
Yeah,
market meters.
that's good. But I, again, and I say this repeatedly, I'm unalterably opposed to the concept of B3 anyway, so I don't see any reason to vote for spending more money to study something that I'll never vote for in the final analysis anyway. So I'm going to remain consistent on that. The bigger problem I have is, in a perfect world, as you explained to me, Roy, that this is a very good quantitative net value analysis that we're doing, we should do anyway. And in a more perfect world, when things are more normal, I would vote for something like that. We need that kind of public policy discussion and consideration and just running our system, let alone whether we sell it or not. However, that's not the times we're in. And so I'm very opposed to spending money, now $1 million again. It started off $500,000, went to $3 million, we're back to $1 million, on something that I consider illogical at this moment in time anyway. the public policy analysis should happen someday, but today's not the day. That's a good expenditure of money, but not when you're laying off 2,000 to 3,000 people. So that's a good policy analysis to go through in 2 to 3 years from now, but not in today's market and today's economy that we face. So I'm going to remain opposed to it in just the concept of P3. I think the council has had a change of heart on the whole concept anyway, so why do we keep spending money on analyses and going forward on something that I'm not so sure there's a will for the council to go forward on it even at this point? It seemed to have changed recently. So I'm just going to remain consistent and vote no. I just wanted to state that.
I might be with Mr. Smith. I'm not too sure. I'm still trying to struggle with it. How long will this study take? When will you have final opinions on this thing? Assuming you get the approval, when would we know something?
I think our schedule is to come back to you with something by mid to late July.
Mid to late July.
Right, just wanted to clarify.
Preliminarily.
Yeah,
Preliminarily.
preliminarily, the data analysis, the data compilation is currently taking place, should be completed in the very near future. Surveying the parking meters, taking a look at the parking structures and the rate structures, and getting all the data together. Once the data comes together, the policy analysis, the data analysis takes place over a couple of weeks. So that would be the preliminary findings that would be presented to you in early to mid-July, following which we would have to do further study.
I'd like to have Mayor to come up for a second, please, from DOT. The reason I'm asking him to come up, some of you might have heard our discussions in the council chambers with him. When we got engaged in what we call the gold in the gutter, which was our parking meters were 25 cents, where a surrounding town might be $1, or it was 50 cents in this surrounding area, it was $2, or just to be comparative and complementary to the other towns in our area, we looked at an opportunity to improve our meter system and increase the revenue streams from them. But you were stopped somewhere in this process as this P3 discussion was going on. When were you stopped? Do you know?
Good afternoon, council members. Amir Sadati, Assistant General Manager, LA DOT. As we were going full blast with the request for proposal, the preliminary discussions came, excuse me, with the public-private partnership, and there were some preliminary meetings with the mayor's office, and we were asked to look at the P3, and obviously in-house we don't have that expertise, so the mayor's task force was formed, and hence we as staff were not able to perform both a request for proposal of that magnitude and this evaluation of the cost benefit of a P3. So for us it was more of a timing and a staffing issue, and we didn't think that it would make sense for us to fully go forward with a request for proposal when there's this discussion that obviously had not come to council at that time yet. So that's where we did work a lot on the RFP, but we didn't finish it. And as I mentioned in the council last week, we are gearing back up and completing that request for proposal so that it can be ready to be released. At this point, we're just finishing all the necessary work that goes into such a large magnitude project.
And when we went forward with our plan last year for our budget, how much additional revenue did we take in because of the tweaking and tuning and gold in the gutter business?
We're actually getting closer to about 10 million. I believe the CAO had projected maybe 6 or 7, but there were a lot of challenges with the changes of the hours that we mentioned. So we're about 30 million right now, so it's roughly about at $8 to $9 million additional. However, we still have not been able to change all of the signage, the extension of the meter hours, and included some of the Sunday hours. So even though the meters have been changed, the hours haven't been changed yet, the signage. So that would have, I think, brought additional money both from the revenues as well as enforcement.
Natalie Brill, CAO's office. The CAO's report, the financial status report, I think the budget had originally estimated 44 million in parking meters. And I think the last count was, I'm looking at Matthias, 35 million. So parking meter revenue is down from 07-08 to 08-09.
That is correct. I understand that, and one of the reasons is they were stopped couldn't do two things at the same time, including getting up your signage. If you got your signage up, so you could up those hours, what more revenue would we be looking at right now?
If we can get the additional signage, that would include some areas that will have Sunday hours and some other areas that goes to 8 p.m. That's an additional, projection of about another $2 million citywide.
So, and this is a lot to do with the meters, not with the parking structures.
Correct. That's all has to do with the parking meters, not the structures at all.
Because my hope is the mayor's office will maybe do a little canvassing around the horseshoe and realize, I don't know if there's a majority for the meters. I'm definitely against the meters at this point. I've said that publicly since the very beginning of the P3 discussion, because I don't think we're mature enough, the equipment is out there enough, or in enough locations where meters can go, should go, and need to mature themselves out. And hearing Mr. Smith saying he's against the whole concept, is there at all a possibility from the mayor's people, from the mayor's people, to let them go forward with the meters, because that is revenue that we've authorized to be gathered, but we can't put the signage up to do it. I mean, would there be any support you could get? I mean, what would you need to have happen so that we can get that revenue stream going while we're having this discussion about all these other things?
Yeah, the signage has nothing to do with this analysis that's being done. That was just an internal staffing challenge. Again, we quadrupled, doubled some of the city's rates and hours, but unfortunately we weren't able to get the staffing needed. So we're working extra on getting those challenges in place. So that has nothing to do with the P3 analysis that's before you. The department's in the process of, finishing that project. Regardless of what the studies are going to happen, or parallel to the study, we will be working on changing the hours and working with each council office on the hours, the Sundays that are going to be affected in their district. So that has nothing to do with this. So we're finalizing the RFP. I think the timeline that's as presented to you would be in the same timeline. So as their information is presented to you, we will be finalizing the RFP. So whichever policy decision you give, either to them or to us, I think, the department's ready to move either way.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thanks, appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm a bit concerned about where we are with this, because I was under the impression that if we allocated the $500,000 previously, that would allow us to get to a decision point whether we move on with this or not. And here we are today telling us, no, that decision point is really $1 million, not $500,000. And when I've seen the discussion, both in Budget and Finance and in full council, I really don't know what direction this council is going to take. And even with the information before us, even with the data before us, I think philosophically, there's some council members, Mr. Smith, one of them, who just don't like the idea. So I'm concerned about putting more money into this when we may be back again at square one, so telling ourselves, well, we shouldn't have even spent that money studying this when we didn't even know we were going to go in that direction. So I'm not in support of investing another $500,000 in this until we get a better assessment from full council whether this is something we want to do. And secondly, I think $500,000, although it's not all the information we need a decision point at that point. I don't think we should move beyond that. And let me ask this. For the $500,000 that were originally proposed, itemized, what was that going to buy us? Because here we have $1 million budget, but it seems like I'm trying to break it up into $500,000, and it's a different mix now. So what originally, as proposed, what were the $500,000 going to get us?
The $500,000 was actually the initial allocation to begin the work in 0809. The actual total cost of the project at that time hadn't been estimated when the first $500,000 was requested. In the reports you have before you today, we were asked to get to what would it take to get you to that decision point, the actual data that we can rely on for a proper analysis of this proposal, because we get into a catch-22 situation where the council needs the information and needs the analysis. In order to do that analysis, though, however, we need to gather the information. And what it's going to take, the main component of it is a study by Desmond on what's essentially called a utilization survey, where they're going to be looking in terms of the parking meters. They're going to be looking at 13 areas of the city, 13 council districts that have parking meters. They're going to take a look at their rates, hours of occupancy, the generalized land use in the area that impacts demand for parking. They're going to take a look at the current situation, and in fact, they're going to review financial information from prior to the rate increases, so we'll be able to compare what the situation looked like before the recent rate increases and afterwards. They will also be able to use their elasticity model to project what we could get from investing different kinds of technology, for example, pay and display, what we could anticipate from something like that, versus the current situation is a piggyback model where you come into a parking space and there's still time on it, you get to use that time. They will look at the various technologies, they'll look at the policies that are currently in place and provide us with their professional assessment of what the previous situation was prior to parking, the rate increases, what the current situation is, and what the projected situation is. In order to get to that point, yes, it is an additional allocation of $500,000 in 09-10 funding that is available in the SPRF and could get us to a point where we could answer the questions that council asks.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
One of the problems was that when the CEO's office was first approached to look at public-private partnerships and parking, we had some training in what it meant and the overall overall concepts. But we don't have enough information to give you the answers to the questions that you're asking us, which are, how are we doing on parking rates? How are we doing with meters? With new technology help? What have we done in the past? What have we done in the future? We don't have that expertise. Just like when you build a parking lot in a city, we hire an outside parking consultant to come in and look at, do we need the parking or not look at the parking. This is the same issue here with both 10 of these lots as well as the parking meters. What do we have? What's out there? Is the collection doing correctly? You know, could DOT be collecting, 3 times a week instead of twice a week? I mean, what exactly is going on out there that we don't have the expertise to be able to tell you if this is the right benchmark that the city should be at? That's all we're asking for. We have no opinion one way or the other. The opinion is, well, how can we even give you a yes or a no if we don't know what type of parking we have out there and what are the new technologies that we can use? That's all the study is doing. The good thing about this report, the CAO believes, is that it will give you a comprehensive review of the entire parking system and meters and 10 lots. So from that point, if the council directs DOT to go forward, DOT will actually be able to use that data with their RFP. They're not two separate things. It's the same continuum. One way is P3, one way is DOT to go ahead and RFP to do the things that these experts are recommending.
But if we only go one way, which is the parking meters, do we need the full $1 million? Can we do it with $500,000? Can we do it for less? What is what and which is which?
The majority of the money is going for the parking meters themselves. That's the expensive part. The expensive part is having somebody sit out there, and 13 out of 15 council districts have meters. So each of those 13 districts are going to have people out there literally looking at the parking meters, looking at, well, when do people come in? When do people come out? Are the meters full? Are they being collected? What's the best technology? That's why it's so expensive. It's very labor intensive.
And so let's say we get to that point and we have $2 million in the UB for additional development costs.
Then you won't need it.
We won't need it at all.
If you decide to go with DOT.
If we don't.
If you decide to move forward with the P3 project, then there are certain things that are required by the private sector for us to have, such as, some type of document, term sheet that we will need to put out there, a bidding document to bid them out. You will need a data room where all the outside bidders can come and look at.
So now you're saying this $1 million would get us to that decision point, whether we move forward or not, and then those 2 additional $1 million are to preliminary project cost that you get going. Okay. And let me again say, I think I was willing to look at the data to say whether it makes sense or not. And I have to temper that with how much it costs me to get that data. I was willing to do it for $500,000. Now at $1 million, I'm beginning to say, well, wait a minute, let me look over my back to see if the council is even going to move forward with this, if the support is there, because I don't want to be one of those at the end of the day that says, well, we shouldn't have done this because we don't even have the support. So at this point, I'm not comfortable moving forward until I get a better sense whether the full council is supportive to say it's willing an investment, let's get that data, and let's move on. And I think others are philosophically just opposed. How many of those are there versus, let's look at the data first? I don't know, but we need a better assessment of that before, I mean, I would want to invest more going down this path even further, so, thanks.
If I could I ask Mike Healy to come up for this? When you mentioned that a lot of this time and money has to do with the meters, golly, I'm against the meters being on the plate at this point, though I'm not against necessarily looking at the structures.
It's the meters aren't the work that's being done on the meters will do what the questions that you've been asking.
Yeah.
It's like, how many meters do we really need on the block? Is it better to have this technology or that technology?
Yeah.
What's the turnover? But the most important question that we're asking them to look at is the parking rates. We increased parking rates, and we saw a decline in parking meter revenue. So the question is that really because it is too expensive in that area? Should they really be paying $2 an hour in, San Pedro, or should we be paying $2 an hour at the beach, like Santa Monica does? What's the right answer? And that is based on the usage of the meters themselves. I think that's called elasticity. How long is the turnover? Are there businesses in front there? Are the businesses getting enough business? Is there free parking around the corner? That all has to do with the parking rates. And we keep asking ourselves, are the parking rates correct for each area? We did not do a study before we raised all those rates.
Well, I'm not compelled as that is the reason, because our DOT people are doing their work and going forward with it, and I don't find that as compelling as I do, and I'm glad you're here, Mr. Keeley. There's a conversation going on here, you might have been here listening to it, where there might not be votes to move this to the next level other than let the council discuss it through. And one of the reasons is when we first started this, we thought it was $500,000, we went with it. And then we saw it was $3 million plus, and then we're back to now it's $1 million, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, in the last month and a half, we've seen nothing but horror stories out of Chicago. I mean, like the worst possible political horror stories one can get. And so then even the notion of putting something on the block. And then, of course, when Chicago did it, the economy was not what it is today, and there ain't $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and people are freaking out. And we now, as a city, furloughs, layoffs, early retirements, God knows what, up the pension contribution, all these things are on the plate. So every nickel, be it the Lakers coming back and who pays for that, or be it this study, becomes an issue. So the $500,000 worked for us. Now we're looking at a spreadsheet here that has some figures in here that, 125 for lawyers, 100 for this, 75 miscellaneous, and we got $1 million here. Basically asking you to pitch us on why this is critical. We've heard all these other discussions, but from you.
Mike Healy, Senior Advisor to the Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I think from the mayor's perspective, the issue is, as the department, as DOT has reported, we're looking at $25 to $30 million of capital investment just for equipment, the meter upgrades. And that's not just for the life of a potential concession. That's just in the near term. So really, what's the DOT is here, you can ask them, how long should meters last? Let's say 10 years is the maximum. So if we're talking about a $25 to $30 million capital investment just for equipment without labor, every 10 years over the life of a concession, we're talking about a $250 or $300 million capital investment for meters over a theoretical 50-year life of a concession. So this is, the mayor believes, an opportunity to look at alternative ways to fund that capital investment. At this point in the city's history, as you know, that $25 or $30 million has to come out of the same pot that we access to pay for cops, or we can get it on our credit card, but that also is not without consequence. And, you know, we have to ask questions about where we want to use our credit capacity. And I think there's also a big customer convenience question. How long is it going to take us to move to technology that allows our customers to pay with credit cards or plastic, which is a technology that our competing cities have adopted much more widely than we have thus far? And are we content to allow the department to continue on the path that it's on? And what it's proposed, it depends. It's been 3 or 4 years at some point. I think now they think they can upgrade the meters in 2 years. But that still has us then incurring a $25 to $30 million cost plus the upgrade. So we believe this $1 million is really a way to assess the alternative capital strategies that are available to us to decide whether or not this makes sense for us to continue in this business or not. I think it's very important that, there have been no reports to this council or to the mayor about the net, the operating profit from the meters. I mean, there's lots of reports about gross, what the total revenues are, but I don't believe that we have an adequate vocabulary to discuss the net, the profit. And honestly, I appreciate the fact I certainly have a front row seat on the city budget predicaments. I know that cash is tight, but as I look at it, this is an opportunity for us to get information which, as the joint report said, is useful in all events. Even if we stay in the meter business, this will guide us on how we can raise rates, whether we can raise rates, what's appropriate. For example, the meter folks that have been in the streets are reporting that a great deal of our problem is the cans are full. And sort of having data about what percentage of the cans are full and what is that costing us, et cetera. We don't have that data right now. And that's, frankly, as you called it, gold in the gutters or in the cans, as the case may be. So to me, this is all just an opportunity for a fresh look at the way we're doing business, to ask ourselves if there are other ways that allow us to, that are cost effective and that make sense. The mayor has no preordained view that it has to be one way or another. He certainly has heard the message from each of you that this is something that causes you great concern. He is not oblivious to what's going on in Chicago. And his challenge to us is we better be able to learn from those mistakes or else we shouldn't follow that road. So I think that we will, at the appropriate time, have explanations and strategies that will allow us to avoid what Chicago went through and learn from their mistakes.
I think you're very articulate in that, Mike. And Amir, would you concur that this could only help you get your act together as you're working on moving in that direction? I mean, I'd like to see a plus, a rationale why what he just said, makes sense if it does make sense to you.
Thank you, Mike. That was very eloquently done. As Ms. Brill and Mr. Keeley mentioned, I think the study would bring value to the department. That being said, I think we've done about 2.5, 3 years worth of pilots. So I think the department is clear on what technologies we think can work, and we have looked at other cities. We've actually sent staff to other cities. So technology piece, I think we have, and I believe as part of this study, we were asked what programs you would put in place as a department if there was not going to be a P3. So we do have that information that's going to be assessed and looked at along the other measures, but I just think we can't simply look at the revenue as the only key source. I think there are many complexities why some of that revenue has not come into place, and the issues with the cans being full. There are a lot of complexities with parking. So I think if the council decides to fulfill the additional study or the full value of the study, I think the short answer, yes, the department would benefit from that study. We will work with them. We have already provided a lot of information to them, and as long as the task force works with the department as far as getting that clarification, then I think that's the only thing the department wants, is for you to make sure you have an apple-to-apple type comparison. So I hope that answers your
The
question.
bottom line is, you see it as benefit to the department as is in helping us either go forward with our meter strategy internally, gold in the gutter, or if we were to do something else. In other words, you are part of this study, you're part of the criteria as they're setting it up, they're doing things that you might want to have done anyhow but couldn't do because of labor constraints and other things. I just want to hear you say that even if we don't do P3, be it the meters or the structures, DOT will have benefited from it in what I consider to be an important strategy, which is new technology, new right hours, collecting the money, and upping the revenue.
Yeah, we're not part of the task force, but we are part of the study in a way that they are checking with us as far as our approach.
Should you be on the task force? Or is that-
At this point, I think we're just providing the necessary information as requested.
Okay, so you're able to say at least that you feel a sense of ownership that what they might do will complement you? That's what
Yes.
In other words, I don't want to see this money wasted if we go forward with it. If the practical benefit could be to enhance the department's abilities.
Yeah, I think you have a very difficult policy decision to make, but again, whatever decisions you make on the additional monies or whatever the consultants can come up with the original 500,000, I think the city or the department can benefit from whatever information is provided as far as the approach, as far as some of the accountability that was mentioned, some of the collections and some other assets. But as far as the technology piece, I think we have a good grip on that. But again, if it's a consultant that's looking and providing additional information, I don't think it would hurt.
Mayor, before you leave, let me ask, on the timing that's reflected on the consultants, how does that match with your RFP going out? And how would that help in constructing the RFP?
If the preliminary results are supposed to come back mid to late July, is what I think I heard you say,
Probably early July.
then I think that would be helpful and in line with our timing, because I won't be able to get the additional information we need or complete the RFP until end of July.
Okay. And then let me just ask of the CAO, on dealing with that one area of the study, and they're talking about 13 zones, and then in one place they say it's 13 streets. And the concern I have is if you have a district like I have that only has about 1,400 parking meters, and they're geographically different and their usage is significantly different. If you go to Lamert Park, you'll have a completely different view of parking meters than at USC. And how do we make an analysis on 13 streets? And we're talking about, 40,000 meters?
Really, this is a statistical sampling process, and so what the consultant has done is to group the meters into, let's call them productivity bands. So some of the meters in your district, council member, as you know, are very productive. They generate a lot of revenue, and other meters are less productive. So the theory is that once you've grouped the meters into bands like that, so you've identified which ones are the highest producing, which ones are lower producing, that then you will see patterns in the data. So a high producing meter in part of your district is likely to have the same profile as high-producing meters in other parts of the city. But it really, I mean, there is, whenever you do statistical work, there are judgments that you're making. I think the most interesting comment we had was the parking consultant who did all this very same work for Chicago promised us that when he was done, we would have the best data in the world. I think, frankly, thanks to DOT, we probably already have a good leg up on that. But the truth is, this is more of an art than a science, and it is difficult to get, especially with 40,000 meters in very, very different areas. It's difficult to get very precise data about whether on this block a quarter additional, for example, would cause problems or not.
And then, Amir, let me ask you, have we solved that issue with the increase in the meter rate as far as the cans being full, or what have we done in that regard?
We're definitely working with our current vendor. We have a contractor, Circo, that's working on our collection. So we have increased ever since September when the rates went in place. So we've done this adjustment and we have come to a much, much better place. However, I think with the furloughs and other things come into place, we are going to have some challenges there, because that's an operation that's going to if I can't collect on a Friday and it goes all the way to Monday, it's going to have challenges. So we also found out some issues with some problems where it wasn't being reported that these meters were actually not being collected. We thought they were being collected, so a lot of things we're finding out, and Serco is working with us on those challenges. But it's just realistically, I mean, I think we have to think of the bigger picture, and right now I am going to almost Saturday collections in order to keep up, because again, we've increased the city throughout. We weren't able to do the staffing increases, so I have to use the existing people I have, not only to do the collections and count the monies, but also the maintenance. There's going to be some maintenance issues. So just for you, I think, to be aware of the balance of the staffing and with the budget shortfalls coming, that will have an impact.
Okay. But I thought that the collection of the meters was a contract with ACS.
No, the collection of the meters is a contract with Serco. The
Serco.
Parking citations is a contract with ACS.
But what's the deployment or furlough issue if it's an outside contract?
Right now, they collect, council member, but it's internal staff, city staff that are actually counting the coins, and then we're getting pickup from...
But the delay in counting is not as significant as having the issue of taking it out of the machine. The delay in counting is secondary to getting it out of the machines so they're operational. So if the outside contractors are taking it out of the machines to where they...
We would need staff to be present at the current, to be able to accept it and then put it in our facilities for 3 or 4 days until the banks open. So instead of the money being in the bank, the larger quantities will be in our premises.
But if the people are collecting it timely and the machines are functioning, and are they responsible for the repair of the machines if they go out?
No, that would be the city folks. Those are our meter techs.
So the issue is that furloughs would impact us counting it and maybe having to hold the money for a longer period, not that it would impact us collecting it out of the machines.
That is correct. The collections still be contracted out, but we'll have less investigators out there. We'll have less of our city folks overseeing that.
Let me just say on this issue, and this is kind of a repeat of what we went through during council, let me tell you what I thought we've agreed to. I thought that we agreed to move forward on a $500,000 study that would give us an indication of what our inventory was, and in my mind would help LADOT to reflect on their RFP and other things to determine just exactly where we were. I did not get a sense when we left council that day that we were continuing a study with the thought that it's going to give us a P3 versus a non-P3. I thought we were doing this for an in-house purpose of evaluating what was our inventory about meters. And so I left there thinking that it was a $500,000 deal. We later found that no, it's $1 million deal, and the issue is now when you read the report, it keeps guiding us to this evaluation of P3, and I just didn't think that's what I voted on in council. What I need to know is, and how quickly we can get it back, is what do we get for $500,000? That would help DOT understand their inventory on meters. Do we know?
Not off the top of my head. We do have the detail. We could probably put that together, but if you want to include both parking structures and meters.
The issue was meters.
Meters as well?
Yeah, that's what I thought we did.
Well,
and others may have a different opinion.
Councilmember, we still need to do something on the structures, even if the council, I think the feedback we've gotten is that if there's a financial deal that makes sense, structures are something that the council is still willing to consider. So a good deal of the $500,000 that we propose to spend is really earmarked for structures. So, for example, can we increase the rates at the structures? How do the rates at the structures compare to rates at other structures in the same neighborhood? What's the capital condition of the structures, et cetera? So, we haven't really broken it down between structures and meters because, as a team, we've been pursuing both. We certainly can go back and look at anything you wish for us to look, but it's not like we can ignore the structures at this stage because we will not get the value that they're worth unless we do this kind of analysis.
Let me say this, what I agreed to and what I think I agreed to and I support today is $500,000 in studying the inventory for the meters, so that we'd know exactly as a city where we are on that issue. I'm not willing to go to $1 million, and I think somewhere down the line, after we figure out with RFP and meters, then structures and other things may come after that, but I'm not prepared today to add another $500,000 to this issue. And what my main interest in, we pushed Amir and others in transportation through the T committee, was to get the RFP done, get out, and that we were going to see how the city of LA could manage its meter resources. And now that that RFP has been put to the side, our emphasis again is to get it back on the road, but analyze in the future what we could help in identifying types of equipment, types of resources, and what we could do in the future. So that's where I stand on it. And what I would recommend that we do is to continue number 15 and 21 and ask the CAO and CLA to bring back to us what would $500,000 do for the city of LA, and an analysis, and hopefully I've captured the theme of what was discussed in the council, and we can reschedule that once that report is ready for committee, if we can agree on that.
I'd like to make another comment if I could. I would hope, and it's a difficult world we're in, frankly, if we could go the $1 million under normal circumstances, the more we know about things, the better off we are. The better we understand things and analyze things, the better we do with our meters and our structures. All these kind of stuff matter. I would suggest, there's only a suggestion, that the $500,000 that we had originally approved, that you judiciously figure out how to best spend that to include what Amir just said. I think if you sat with our DOT people, you would learn a lot more about their moment than you think you know. I don't think you know exactly what they did in the last 6-8 months when they surveyed things, started to raise the money, didn't get enough people to pick it up. These are logistical issues that can be worked. It isn't their incompetence. It's that they moved so quickly and they didn't have the staff to do it all. It's basically that. I would think a consultant could come in and debrief DOT strongly enough to get from them a lot of information that DOT has that they would be willing to give. So my dream would be this, that $500,000, because it seems to be the consensus of the group, that you would have the flexibility in that to do the structures, which is one thing I might be supportive of. I'm not supportive of the meters at this point. It's premature and immature and all this other stuff, and I just don't buy into it today, personally. I don't know what my colleagues think. But I'd rather see that $500,000 spent differently than the way the $1 million was put together. I mean, just do more with less would be my hope that we could do with the $500,000.
All right, so we'll have this rescheduled at a time in which that report is forthcoming as to how to best use that $500,000 that could represent the sentiments of the committee. So we will continue number 15 and 21. Before we go in closed session, let me ask, number 7, we intend to continue, but Mr. Baumann is here and would like you to come up and make your comments on this. And Pete has not reviewed this issue, and we're going to ask the continuance of the city attorney to look at it. But we'd like to have Mr. Baumann come up and make his public comment, so you would get the benefit of his comments in your review.
We appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Parks and members of the committee. My name is John Bowman with Jeffer Mangels, Butler, and Marlboro. My firm represents Claret Hollywood, LLC, the developer of the Boulevard 6200 mixed-use project in Hollywood. This case concerns my client's request for a refund of about $223,000 in plan check fees that were paid in late 2007. The Building and Safety Department in this case acknowledges that a refund is appropriate, acknowledges furthermore that the plans that were submitted in this case were not checked by the department. Nonetheless, the department is recommending that $47,787 of the plan check fees, which amounts to a little over 20% of the plan check fees paid, be withheld. And it is my client's position that under the unique facts and circumstances of this case, such a retention would be inappropriate and inconsistent with state law. I don't know if I have a time limit, but if I could try quickly summarize the gist of our arguments.
And we all have your letter.
Thank you. We have submitted a letter which does outline our position, but essentially it comes down to the fact that the portion or the plan check fees at issue here concern plans for the South Block portion of the project, plans which were not checked. The code does authorize, in certain circumstances, the retention of 20% of fees paid for clerical and overhead charges, and we submit in this case that clerical and overhead charges for essentially logging in a set of plans and putting them in a bin for a period of about 1 week could not possibly approach anywhere near the $47,000 that Building and Safety is retaining, therefore inconsistent with state law, which requires that the fees for services such as plan check bear some reasonable relationship to the value of the services rendered. So we're asking that the entirety of the plan check fees be refunded in this case. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your time today.
Pete, on your analysis, can you do that by the time we schedule for next week's meeting? Or
1 week continuance should be
1 week would be
enough.
fine.
Yes.
And I think one of the things, having looked at this a couple of times, there's an issue on this area that deals with, and I don't understand the terms, case management and plan check.
Yes.
And it appears that the department views that case management is a process that all the things they do for the client before they submit their plans for checking. And it's my understanding that they don't charge for that unless plan check becomes a part of it. And so when plan check becomes a part of it, then what we've been advised is that then they take into account all the case management dollars or time that they've spent.
Right.
So the best we could come to, and I don't know if it's legal or not, but you'll have to figure it out. The best we could come to grips with was the 20%, depending on who you spoke to, was either a ordinance that required it to be that, set at that, or we were trying to get the case management funds that had been done. And so between all of that, we do need to get it reconciled, because we historically have been told that these funds that we collect are for specific duties, not generic titles.
Correct. And we will, I have the comments of council, as well as I'm getting a copy of the letter that he has filed with you. And I will make sure that we discuss it with the department before we come back next week.
Very good. Thank you. So we'll continue this for 1 week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go in closed session for items 1 through 5. And we have a quorum, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Rosenthal, and myself, Bernard Parks, as chair, and we're going to have the city attorney read into the record language as it relates to item number 4. Item number 4. And we're joined by Mr. Smith.
Sigmund Shu, Deputy City Attorney. The City Attorney's Office recommends that council in open session adopt the language following in compliance with the writ of mandate. The language is, City Council hereby vacates the issuance of an exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act, parens CEUA, close parens, by the City Council on April 13, 2005, with respect to 3200 Duran Drive.
Thank you very much. We'll adopt that amendment to the report. Next item.
Okay, next items are items 10 through 12, all having to do with the city treasurer's investment report for the months ending February 28th, 2009, January 31st, 2009, and December 31st, 2008.
The other issue is, and so for the record's clear, in addition to those 3 reports, and that's what items 10, 11, and 12, we also have a letter from the city treasurer that's dated June the 12th, 2009, that's the subject intention to forego a Moody Investors service ratings. We want to, although we note and file those 3 reports, we want to take an action in supporting this letter. So I don't know quite how we do it mechanically.
Is there a recommendation in the letter? I'm sorry, I didn't look.
The letter has a recommendation in it, but the issue is we wanted to distinguish it from the 3 reports, because those are note and file. We want to support the recommendation of this letter.
and that will go on, each report is done separately. Each of the investment reports is done separately. This will go as a recommendation with the first report.
Okay, so that would be the most recent, February 2009?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Joya DeFore, City Treasurer. Nothing really new to report except that over the next 2 weeks, Treasury will be looking in earnest as to our general fund percentages as it relates to the general pool based on the reduction of our general fund revenues over the last few weeks. At this point, we still are confident that we will hit our budget marks, but we are concerned about next year and the degradation in the general fund revenues.
Okay. And then the whole issue, I mean, when you say that we're concerned, could you just give us an overview in the sense of what your perception for this year and next year and how they might, the impact on our investments and what that might be?
Absolutely. This year, I think everyone has recognized that the majority of our general fund revenues have lagged behind our estimates. The amount of money that the city invests is a general pool of which the general fund is only a small portion of that. Historically, that portion has been about 16%. We are looking at that percentage on a month-by-month basis now, and it appears that that percentage is dropping pretty rapidly. So again, while we are pretty confident with this year, next year we have some concerns that there will be 16% general fund percentage of general pool, and our preliminary estimates are that it could fall as low as 10%. What that would mean is that in very short order, we would have to come back to the city council and all the policy makers and revise a revenue estimate based on just the dropping percentage of the general fund as a percentage of the general pool.
Okay. And then let me ask you also, in the sense of, as we had the discussion at a previous meeting, this whole issue with Moody, it's clearly defined that the investment versus the debt side, there's two different perspectives and that they do not conflict with each other.
They are totally separate. The investment ratings are purely discretionary, with the city being one of the few cities in the country that has an investment rating, while the debt ratings are required.
Okay. And then one thing I want everybody's attention. We want you to know that you're in the presence of royalty here with Ms. DeFore, that she has recently been identified in the Treasury and Risk magazine as one of the top 100 influential people in finance, along with such people as Warren Buffett, Secretary of Treasury Tim Geithner, and also Sheila Blair, who's the chair of US FDIC. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. But, you know, it's not a one-person ship. I'd like to thank my staff and the support of all of you on the city council who have held me to pretty tough standards, Councilmember Smith. But I think it paid off, yes, sir. But especially my staff, especially at times like this where, you know, it's hard sort of to keep focus. I have to commend my staff for staying focused and doing a good job and knowing that we're not perfect, we'll make mistakes, but it's important to just try to do better every day. So thank you.
You're welcome. Let me just ask a little side question, is that you've done a significant amount of the investment and such. Have you ever been contacted by any of our city pension funds as to investment strategies, or does that coalesce at all, or is that something totally different from what you do?
Well, I have not been contacted by any of the city's pension plans. However, in a previous life, specifically MTA, the treasurer's office there, when I was treasurer, was responsible for pension investments for two of the plans, for the ATU and the UTU.
But you've not had any contact with them?
Not with the cities.
I have nothing other than to go along with Winston Park said, but congratulations, we're very proud of you. And
Thank you very much.
and when I heard the other day at the council, which I'd never heard before, we were the only city that were doing some of these creative things. It kind of blew me away, actually. I never knew that before, but it just shows the kind of strength and ideas that you brought to the job, and it's paid off well, so thank you.
Well, thank you, but again, it's a team effort.
That's nice, but you still, that's nice, but you're still the one that was named as the person that had the vision and the leadership and brought your team. A team doesn't win a game without a coach, so.
And I congratulate you as well, but following up on Mr. Parks' comment there, in your previous life, you did have a role with looking at how the pensions were invested, right?
More than having a look at, but I was responsible
for it. So would it be an added burden, or would it be a joy, or would it be something if we put you, obviously you know what you're doing, we know what you're doing, and I'm not criticizing them at all, but have you looked at what they've done and how they've done it?
I have not looked at it. It would be challenging. It's different from the fixed income that we do in Treasury, but again, it's with pension plans, you tend to manage outside managers. In my experience, I've found it to be easier than being responsible for fixed income directly. With pension plans, in my experience, the staff need to know enough to oversee outside managers and hold them to particular guidelines and standards. Do they particularly need to know how to do it themselves? Not necessarily. It's better if they do. I think a couple of people on my staff have been responsible for other asset classes other than fixed income.
Mr. Parks, is there anything we can do about that? Because I'd love to take her expertise, her genius, her obvious contribution to all of us, and see if she can be of some assistance to
You know what I was thinking of, and again, if we could ask the CLA-CAO to pull together a meeting with the 3 pension plans and the city treasurer and discuss these issues as it relates to investments and such, so that we can have an exchange of information and expertise that she may bring to their day-to-day operations.
I would second that. I just think it would be outstanding, and you'd be, again, getting a gold star as far as I'm concerned, just to meet with them, look at what they do, and give some, suggestions or advice or support.
Well, they always have my support, so be happy to.
If we can find a way to do it delicately, we don't want to upset anybody, but the point of the matter is, you are terrific, and we'd love to see some of your expertise and leadership filter over. That'd be great.
Thank you.
So we're going to have CLA to put that together for us, and not just an introductory meeting, but actually where they get a chance to talk about the real issues of investments and where the expertise in the Treasurer's Office can be brought to bear on some of the things they're doing.
Congratulations on your recognition.
Thank you.
Let me say thank you very much, and what we're going to do is move 10, 11, and 12, receive and note and file, but we will also, as part of item 10, is that the right one? Item 10, we will approve the recommendations of the Treasurer's June 12, 2009 letter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
That's it?
Okay, next, it's the special meeting agenda.
Now, do we have 16?
I had a question on 16.
I'm sorry. You're correct. Next is item number 15, or 16, which is the city attorney report relative to workers' compensation legal services agreement.
On the record now.
Well, you got a chance.
Okay, you got 2 minutes.
Yeah, you get a chance to torture him for every day at the council.
2 minutes, and if you veer off the subject at all, we're going to nail you.
Dean O'Connell, Deputy City Attorney. I have been unable to contact Ann Haley, who drafted this report, and perhaps she could get in contact with you before it gets to council?
Let me just give you the question, and if she could give me an answer, and that is, in this previous program, we'd set this $5,000 as the limit to the negotiated agreed upon price that we pay just across the board on all these cases. This proposal is to take out a lot of the lower cases just out of that mix, because they're smaller and we can save money. Would that change the calculation then? Because I think when these companies negotiate the deal, it's predicated on, we'll give you some easy ones that you make more money on, and you'll take some loss on the ones you got to work harder on, and you come up with this average price of $5,000. Now that we're taking out some of these smaller cases that they can make money on, save money on, is the companies that are doing this deal at $5,000 going to be willing to accept $5,000 anymore? Because you're putting more risky cases, more time-intensive cases into the mix. The mixture becomes much more heavily weighted toward the top. If I was negotiating for those companies, I'd say, this is not such a good deal anymore. I don't think $5,000 works for me. So I just want to make sure that thought process is taking place.
But I think these came about when we got away from the hourly rate.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
So then I think as we gear down from cases, hopefully most of them are coming internally, that this is kind of like a substitute bench to go to, because we have the conflict bench, and then we have these in case there's something that's beyond our not our expertise, but our workload.
Well, it's definitely not my expertise.
Yeah.
I'll ask Ms. Haley,
Okay.
and then...
That's all.
So we'll get that at the time it comes to council.
Yes.
Okay, that's on 16. So we will approve that, the recommendations, and request those those answers by the time it gets to council.
Okay, I believe that now this takes us into the special meeting, item number 19, which was continued from June 8th, 2009, which is pursuant to recommendation number 98 of the Budget and Finance Committee report adopted by the City Council on May 18th, 2009. The City Controller, City Administrative Officer, and the City Treasurer to report with an update on the city's cash flow projections for 2009 and 2010-11.
Okay, thank you. I think what we wanted to do today was we got a verbal report and an outline on one of our previous meetings, but we wanted a report that would basically reflect the verbal report that the Controller's Office gave us, so it could be part of either the FSR presentation tomorrow or sometime this week, that we can get this information to the full council as to the condition of the city's finances as it relates to cash flow. So we don't have a report, so I'm wondering is that report forthcoming, or?
Bill Lamb from the Controller. The problem that we have at this point in working with the CAO is defining the assumptions to bring expenditures in line with the budget. We are $385 million at a spend rate above the proposed budget. The assumptions that we are fairly confident on include $100 million for furloughs, $90 million for positions that are in the budget but not funded, eliminating the $46 million transfer from the general fund to the reserve fund. There is no consensus at this point in discussions with the CAO on reducing position authorities, how to reduce position authorities, and I'm talking about actual people, not just authorities, and what the ultimate impact is going to be on the reserve fund. The concepts that we have talked about is 1,000 retirements at one point, 1,000 retirements at another point, 1,000 layoffs at another point. But in discussing with the CAO that the instructions from the council and the EERC have modified some of the assumptions, so we are still working. One of the concerns is that if we have 3,000 general fund people leaving, that reduces the general fund staffing by 25 to 30%. And in putting together the assumptions for the cash flow for the TRAN, we are cognizant of the fact that we're putting out a public document And if things go wrong, it's a document that is subject to the SEC review. So at this point, we're still working with the CAO on defining what the assumptions are, what are reasonable assumptions for bringing salary expenditures in line with the adopted budget.
But your report, if I understand it, is independent of the CAO, and to the point that even if they don't agree, that they have the ability to comment on what they disagree on, and you have the ability to amend your assumptions down the road if things change.
Well,
is that
except at this point, we're putting together a cash flow for the TRAN
yeah.
and the assumptions on that, and going out to the public, into the public debt market, what are the most realistic assumptions? And if the CAO is saying that the assumptions may not be realistic at this point, we need to reflect whatever is the most realistic that we've got.
I understand, and the thing I'm concerned about is that we not create an assumption for the TRAN to get the TRAN that may be inconsistent with what's reality.
We are, this year, we want to make sure that at least what we start with is realistic for the budget for actual expenditure, so that we don't have two sets of assumptions. If we were to have one set of assumptions for the TRAN and one set of assumptions for cash flow, that would not put us in a very favorable light.
But I think also that some of our assumptions as we go down the road will alter depending on the success or lack of success in negotiation or givebacks and a lot of things. So as we've said all through the budget, our whole emphasis as a committee here has been we're going to deal with what's real, and other people are negotiating. If they're successful and they tell us they've had some success, then we will plug those in. But we can't run the budget based on conversations of people believing we're close or not close. And so that's why it's important, I think, that we get a report, because council members need to know what the potentials are, and again, understand that they could change if other parameters change.
Well, and that's part of the problem, is defining what is realistic at this point. For example, is 3,000 civilian employees leaving out of the general fund, reducing the general fund civilian employment from 12,000 to 9,000, and not touching police and fire. Again, the mayor and council have made a decision not to touch police and fire. Is 1,000 voluntary retirements in say August, 1,000 in October, 1,000 layoffs, are those realistic assumptions at this point to actually bring expenditures in line with the budget? And that's the conundrum that we've got in trying to put this together. What are the most realistic assumptions?
Okay, but how long will it take us to come up with something that can be produced for the council to be aware of, at least at the time they get it? It's the most realistic elements that we have.
We can put together something. I'm not sure that we can put together something that is realistic.
I mean, when you say realistic, are you saying that it may change?
Well, is it part of the issue that we've had with discussion? Is it realistic to assume that 1,000 people are going to retire in August, 1,000 people are going to retire in October, and that we're going to have 1,000 layoffs in the first part of January?
Yes, excuse me, Matthias Spartan for the CAO. We agree with the controller in that we do need to nail down those assumptions before we release the trans, because the controller uses those to prepare the cash flow that actually goes out to the investors that will be purchasing the trans. And as Bill mentioned, we are trying to the furloughs are known, so we can calculate the amount of savings and the timing of those savings in calculating the cash flow. But as far as the retirements go, we're still working, and you well know that those have been in discussions as far as the timing it takes to approve those. And so we need to find out first what's the realistic timing for those occurring, and when will the people actually be out the door, so we can then factor in the savings for those.
But let me ask you a question on that. Are we zeroing in on the type of exit they take, or are we zeroing in that you're going to have to lose 3,000 people, whether it's furloughs, whether it's retirement, or whether it's sufficient number of layoffs. Is 3,000 the number? They may have to exit in a variety of ways, or?
The number and how they exit and the timing. For example, we're assuming that somebody leaving is paid $70,000. Now, if it's a retirement, we're assuming that they take with them their sick and vacation time, and we're assuming $20,000. If there's a layoff, they do not take they do not take sick time with them. They do take vacation time. We're assuming $5,000. If somebody leaves in the August time frame, we're looking at a savings of somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 people, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 million. If we're looking at October, we're looking somewhere in the savings of 35 million. If with layoffs in January, we're looking at the savings of about 30 million, because the savings depends upon how much we pay them during the rest of the year, offset by the amount that we have to pay them for leaving in either vacation and sick or on vacation time, and that does not include any golden handshake or retirement incentive that may be there, and it also doesn't include the cost of any unemployment insurance that the city would have to pay.
But again, getting back to the basics, is that what I thought the projection for cash flow is that the controller was going to do much like the committee and the council that said we have to deal with what we know. And what we know, regardless of what the negotiations are, is that there's a certain dollar figure that we're going to have to hit to balance the budget. And then that menu of options can kick in, but it doesn't change the baseline of what has to be done to balance the budget.
We can put something together. I do want to say that the CAO has expressed some concerns about some of our assumptions based upon instructions from the EERC and concerns about labor negotiations.
So I talked to Ray, I know he's not here right now, but Ray earlier this morning, because you and I had spoken on Friday. Ray wasn't here to see where the kind of the coming together could occur. And I think from my understanding is that that where you're going, Mr. Parks, is right, is that we have to either, that menu of options is either, early retirement, layoffs, furloughs, COLA, whatever it may be, but that we are prepared within the city to take action to ensure that that amount is found, and whatever the combination thereof would be, and to guarantee that to the potential lenders, that we are in the process and have taken enough actions to be able to say we're ready to pull the trigger, so to speak, to be able to meet that. And I think that the issue was between the CAO and the Controller's Office was trying to mix that language in the specificity as you put forward, and still allow the flexibility to go out and borrow the money, knowing that some actions will take place post borrowing that will impact that.
And part of the issue here is that there are a number of discussions that are going on as we go ahead. One of the issues is that normally the cash flow follows the budget. In this case, we're using cash flow to help define reality, which makes the cash flow much more difficult to put together.
Let me ask one other thing you mentioned earlier when you said police or fire, it's untouched. In reality, the civilians within those departments are part of the shared responsibilities in the negotiations, but also part of the mayor's budget actually puts a 10% on each one of the sworn side. So the issue is whether they come up with it is one thing. The other issue is that it's in the budget that basically was used as a balancing strategy. So the issue comes up that if it's 300 million or 360 or whatever, that's the only reality we have, and there's certain things we're going to have to do to hit that number. And again, how they come about and the timing, as we've said all along, that if you don't negotiate, it could be more layoffs, more furloughs that are within our power. If the timing later comes up to where there's some givebacks, you can loosen that number. But the only two tools we have as a council is furloughs and layoffs once the budget has been approved. Again, it could be softened by negotiations and other issues. So and I understand the CAO's concern in the sense that these negotiations are going on and they're having discussions, but I don't know how that impacts the cash flow in reconciling what the budget has been presented, approved, and numbers that are clearly stated. There's 360-some million or whatever it is, has to be reconciled to make it a balanced budget.
The problem is how to get from the one to the other. We're spending at a rate that is significantly higher than the budget. And so the question is, in terms of reality, normally we would have a plan to get from one to the other. Right now, we don't have that plan, so it's a case of assumptions. And what is the most realistic assumption? On the one hand, the police and fire are in the shared sacrifice. On the other hand, there's full replacement in the budget, as I understand it. Civilian employees, we still have full employment, and we are in the process of taking steps that hopefully will bring employment down. But the assumptions for the cash flow are very difficult given the circumstances where we don't know how that's going to be. Again, it gets back to the issue that normally a cash flow would follow the budget. In this case, we're trying to come up with assumptions to form a realistic cash flow based upon a changing scenario. And the question from my standpoint, and from the standpoint, I think, of the controller and the CEO, is how realistic are those assumptions? And since we want to be in the debt market, which is a regulated market, how far do we want to be out on those assumptions, and what assumptions do we want to make?
But I think the issue is we can't deny the 300+ million. Now, we've approved up to 4 furloughs if that becomes technique. The issue is I think we've approved 400 layoffs and the potential of 1,200 more, and then the thought that if these negotiations didn't go, there'd be another wave of them. And so, again, we only have 2 tactics, but again, I understand that we may at some point have to readjust, but it doesn't appear that we are in a position that we shouldn't be making these assessments on what we know today. Now, if next week something miraculous happens, we'd have to go back and say, based on these new sets of facts, here's where we are. That's why I don't see, when we say that the realistic, the only realism we have is we have a significant budget deficit and we're spending more money than we have, and the only way to reduce the money is to in some way reduce the impact of employees on the budget. There's only, we can get rid of all the equipment and expense items, and we'd still be talking about the same thing. So it only gives us a very narrow focus as it relates to what our mission is. And so that's why I'm wondering how, and I understand the CEO is looking at a lot of other things, but cash flow-wise, it looks like we can only deal with what we know.
Well, in part, the cash flow is the cash flow for the actual expenditures that we're making.
Right.
And those expenditures are significantly higher than the budget at this point.
So Bill, if you were to make the assumption that the cash burn continued at the same level through the TRAN process time, and we take these actions and actually reduce it, the worst case happen is we have more money in the TRAN than we need and we give it back faster. That's the worst case, right? If you use that assumption that the cash burn continues at that level, constant.
I missed something.
If you're spending cash at the rate of, what'd you say, 385 million?
We're spending at the rate anticipated on July 1, $3,123 million. The budget is $2,737 million. So $386 million.
Okay. So if you assume that remains constant, you issue the TRAN based on that. Worst case scenario is we keep to that level. Best case scenario is we have any one of those mixture of options we're working on materializes in that time frame, and we don't need all the money, after all.
Well,
we pay that back earlier.
What concerns me is the worst case, because we have to repay the Tran.
And I understand that, and we all get that point. That's the worst case scenario is 385 million, or 80, whatever it was.
Except that the worst case scenario is that in the middle 1990s, at one point, the controller was seriously considering issuing registered warrants. We got out of it because the economy changed around. The issue with repaying the Tran is we would not have the resources to repay the Tran.
No.
That's the worst case.
No, the worst, okay, that's if you make a mistake on the number. I'm saying if we continue at the level of cash burn we're at, not increasing it, and you issue a Tran to meet that, then you don't have that problem.
Yeah.
It's if we don't have revenues to meet it down the road, then we have the problem. But if we continue to spend cash at the level we're spending at, we should have no trouble. We're not going to be stupid and spend more money than we got.
Right now, we're spending more than we have.
I know that. I understand that. And that's why you issue a Tran. Okay? We're trying to reduce the amount, but we won't have the answers for you in time.
No, they're two different things. The Tran is strictly cash flow. It's not budget. Between the Tran and the cash flow, the budget is out of whack in terms of where we're spending. So if we continue to spend at the current rate of expenditure, adjusted for the salary increases built in, we run out of cash and the ability to fund things in May of next year.
I think what we're saying is what he's saying is whether it is furloughs, which is $100 million, or it is layoffs, or it is a combination thereof, sometime in the next month or so, hopefully sooner, 3 weeks, 2 weeks before I go, 2 weeks, we will set the ball in motion, which we already have set it in motion. It's just whether or not it gets stopped and goes a different direction based on discussions with our coalition of unions. But we are set to address that imbalance. What would be problematic is if we went ahead and borrowed at our current level and we didn't adjust that and we just kept spending. And, 2 weeks from now, I'll be the first to scream and say, you're not doing what you need to do to reduce to be able to meet that need. But we're in this,
Well, you'll be the second.
Yeah, you'll tell me and then I'll, yeah.
First. We can put together something that shows, in fact, we have, that shows 1,000 retirements in August, 1,000 retirements in October, and 1,000 layoffs in January.
I think it's more 1,000 layoffs and 1,000 layoffs and 1,000 retirements than it is 2,000 retirements. But I don't see any. We've never talked about a scenario that could give us 2,000 retirements that I recall.
No, those are proposals, of course, that are floating out there.
So, but there again, part of the complexity here is that you and I have different assumptions right off the bat.
But the overall, we all agree this is about 3,000 people.
Yeah.
And however they leave, they're going to reduce the payroll by X number of dollars. Now, some leaving could be less expensive because they were laid off and they weren't vested in the pension. Some people would be more because they have full vacation and sick vacation and sick hour. So we know those are variables, but I don't think we can get around the 300 million shortfall and X number of people are going to be separated in some fashion unless something miraculous occurs.
And I think, and I don't know for sure, Bill, but, I think there should be regular kind of reports back as we look at our cash flow that I don't know what the normal reporting period is other than I know us going out at this time with the Tran, but that we can commit in the future of really having a greater sharing of that information. And Bill, I know, is able to do that. So we don't get to a point where we're in September and we haven't done the 1,000 and we've borrowed all this money and we're out of whack. I think you will be the first to ring the bell. I'll be the second.
We have discussed internally with each payday issuing a report to this committee on what the payroll was in relationship to where it needs to be.
No, I think we need that kind of material, and I think the issue is that we understand that from the Controller's office and the CAO's office, there may always be a difference of opinion, but I don't believe that that reporting should ever get to the point that there has to be mutual agreement for them to be published, because everybody gets to write about somebody else's report if they disagree, and you even get an ability to alter it at some point if something changes.
Well, part of our concern is frankly putting together a cash flow based on assumptions if the CAO, who is privy to the meetings, is saying that those are not realistic assumptions.
I know, but until he brings back concrete accomplishments, they're just conversation.
Okay.
I mean, because you can't put in the cash flow a conversation last week that said this might happen.
Well, except again, our cash flow is going to go into the official TRAN documents, and the CAO is also going to sign a declaration related to those documents.
And he's not going to put anything in there that says, I'm assuming that people were going to give up something that we can't count today. So he's in the same boat we're all in.
And the important thing is if he signs it, he goes to jail, not us, so.
Well,
very good, Greg.
I did tell him that, somewhat in jest, that we're relying upon his assumptions, and if worst comes to worst, that's what we're going to tell the SEC.
Bill, I'm just curious about the 18th of June. Isn't that when a trigger happens on raises and COLAs and all that? You guys administer.
That's the day in which it basically gets logged into the payroll system. And so...
How much money are we talking about?
We're talking about $42 million for the year.
This is a $42 million. And is there anything at this point, other than the mayor or us, or the unions, or somebody saying something, to change that, or are we going to see this $42 million hit?
Unless there's an amendment to the contract, it will be there. Right now, it's a contractual requirement.
That's the 42 we were hoping we could save at some point. Doesn't look that way from your end.
Negotiations have been going on for 6 months, and there's nothing at this point. My assumption going forward is that's the contract.
And the second thing I have is this whole structural deficit that I've talked about for 3 years, which obviously has to do with pension and health care benefits. Has the Controller's office, I know we have a new one coming in, looked at the health issue about self-insuring ourselves as a city, finding a way to get out of this out-of-control health care costs?
Not that I am aware of. Our audit division may be looking at it, but I'm not aware of it. I know that the Controller did come up with a audit report that recommended considering consolidating the investment management of the 3 pension systems into one for some savings, but I don't know where that is at this point.
The pension contribution, which is for civilian employees 6%, is that pretty much?
It's generally 6%. People hired before 1984 are about 2 to 3%. Again, there's a difference between the environment now and the environment at the time, in that the CPI was over 10% on an annual basis at that point. The CPI now is 0, so it's there's some significant differences.
And we know that police and fire, they put in 9% into their pension. Is that right?
Right now, yes. If the pension is fully funded, they put in 8%. They put in 9% on the Tier 5 if the pension system is not fully funded.
I'm just curious from your perspective, because you're not playing politics, you're just looking at the numbers. I've heard a figure floating around of what would make sense for pensions. Do you have any thought about what kind of savings we could have if, say, we upped at 1 point or 2 points or 3 points on the civilian side?
I haven't looked at the amount. I think it makes sense.
somewhere we need the numbers. I've heard different numbers floated around. I would love to tackle that problem, which will be part of our problem next year if we don't tackle it, or at least address it this year, correct?
Very much so. The assumptions on the increase, we've got civilian salary increases coming through next year and also the next 2 years. And the revenue side does not look good for a couple of years.
Yeah. Let's save it more for personnel, but I just appreciated your on the record comments about those issues.
Thank you.
Okay. Jose? Let me just ask, I don't think we'd be able to make the meeting with FSR, but if we certainly would like, with the CLA and the city clerk's office, to find a way that once you get a report done, if we can get that before council this week, because we made a verbal commitment that we would keep them aware, and I'd certainly appreciate if as you proposed that, which is equally important to us as cash flow as it is as to the basically the overall budget, because we got to work on both of them, that we get more often as relates to a report that can tell us exactly where we are. But again, we realize you can only tell us what you know today, and if something changes, it changes, but we need as accurate information as you report it, and again, understanding their assumptions and clearly identify them and let them know it's based on what we know today. And that's all we can ask you to do. And so if we can do that and work it out to where we can get a report to council by this week, I'd appreciate it, so we can keep them aware. Okay.
Thank you.
Next item.
Next item is item number 20, which is continued from the June 8, 2009 meeting, which is the Personnel Department and the CAO to report on the status of layoffs resulting from the adopted 2009-10 budget. Report to identify status by department, including the list of positions submitted by departments, timeline for implementation, displacements in process, and any other pertinent information, and the status of discussions with unions regarding the impact of layoffs pursuant to recommendation 101H of the Budget and Finance Committee report adopted by the council on May 18, 2009. Personnel Department and CAO are here to report.
And can I ask one quick question, Mr., because unfortunately I'm having to sneak out, is just reading the report I think that was released today that says departments have interpreted. So the 405 eliminates abolishment of positions and have coordinated layoffs with personnel department under this assumption. And I think we would, of course, like to avoid anyone being laid off and moving into other positions and so forth. But that sentence, departments have interpreted, did we not give them instructions?
Yes, we did. To be quite honest, I was only given this report probably about an hour ago.
Okay.
I'm
I
not.
got 5 minutes ago, so you're not, but yes, I know.
So
Okay.
I don't really understand what the reference.
Sorry.
Well, I can speak to it. Pretty much, the charter section 1015 states that layoffs may result from a lack of work, lack of funds, or abolishment of positions. Up to now, the departments have interpreted the layoffs that they're working on as a function of not having sufficient position authorities for the currently employed people that they have. So when the council eliminated the position.
I know, we didn't give them instructions when we did the 400 because it's more based on lack of funding and those positions not existing. So
traditionally in the past, it has always been done where it's just that the position is eliminated and then that triggers the layoff. So, and then aside from this, the council, well, the mayor proposed a 10% reduction across the board in salaries. And then the council further increased that reduction to their salary account without eliminating the position authorities. So currently, the departments have far less salaries that they require for the people that are currently employed, but they still retain sufficient position authorities to hold on to the people. Right now, they are working on layoff lists that are geared more towards the funding and addressing the funding portion. But as far as the positions that were eliminated in the adopted budget, it was pretty much just a traditional way of looking at it, where the position authority went away and the person was occupying the position authority, but elsewhere in the department there may have been a vacancy in that same classification where that service wasn't reduced by council. So they just simply moved the person over to that other function.
And that I understand, that's what I understand, but it just, when it was the interpretation, it didn't make sense to me that we didn't give them instructions, that in fact it was, that it was an abolishment of position and a lack of funds, but if they had other positions that were vacant that were funded, then of course move them into those. But if they moved into positions that still exist but were unfunded, I'm not sure how many of those are part of this 400.
Well, and that's why the budget exercise that's being coordinated by the CAO and then per council instruction and the mayor instruction is now to work with the departments to identify the lack of funding portion. Because the lack of funding portion goes far beyond just these positions that were eliminated in the budget. They include it's a larger umbrella, and you really can't treat them independently, because at the end of the day, the departments will have to identify a set number of people that will be laid off in order to meet budget that will go beyond position authorities. You can't mix and match.
Let me just say, I'm totally confused.
Yeah.
Because in the mayor's budget, he identified specifically 400 positions and said,
Yes.
and they were filled, and said they were laid off, they were cut.
Yes.
And we also have something called managed attrition, which means you can't fill positions without going to the CAO.
Yes.
So for a department to take a body out of a laid-off position and move it into a position that is under managed hiring is not basically saying they're being creative. It's just that they're violating the intent of all the directions.
Right now,
and also I want to bring up one other thing. We took every position that was new in the budget and put it in the UB, so in effect, they didn't exist. So if they found those positions and added people to them, they're filling positions that currently don't exist in their budget. So anywhere they move that position, if it was in a new position that we put in the UB, if it was a position that was open that's under managed hiring, or if they just found a way to take them out of the position that was cut, they're violating the intent of the revenue that we were seeking by making those cuts.
Yes, but the council did restore position authorities that had been proposed to be deleted were restored by council, and those went back to the department.
400?
It was around 189, I believe.
How many?
But within the department does have the discretion right now to move people within the department without having to go. Those would not be part of the managed hiring process at this point. It would be if the department was trying to move positions between departments.
But I'm saying, you're saying that the positions that was restored, that would have been cuts from previous budgets?
I know, in the mayor's proposed budget, there was a certain count of positions that were proposed to be eliminated, and through the adoption of the budget, some of those were restored or put back into the departments.
So they have the authorities, but they didn't have the funding for them?
In some cases, that the funding did return as well.
Okay.
But in other
That's
cases,
different.
yeah.
That's different. And in that case, it's just a matter of the CEO authorizing the movement normally, or the filling of the position normally. In the case of bumping, you don't really have that authority, do you, to stop them from filling a position with a person that's bumping into it, if it's there?
Well, we haven't done that yet.
Where we don't have authority is where a position vacates within the organization and the department internally reassigns staff. That's totally within their control. And so, as vacancies occur, they take a look at this list of 400 that are currently filled, they make a decision to move them. And in normal budget years, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because those positions, 9 times out of 10, are going to be funded. And if they're not funded, they presume that they're going to make it up through salary savings during the course of the year. You know, because we do put in a fair number of positions periodically that aren't funded. You know, they believe they'll make it up through the course of the year. And in a normal budget year, that's all fine. What's not fine this year is the second half, which is the shared responsibility piece, where 10% of their salary savings are eliminated on the front end, and therefore the position authorities are now mildly entertaining. You know, that's not the issue. The issue now is how much money do you have in comparison to the staffing volume you have and your projected expenditures. So departments are moving people all the time. You know, to meet operational needs, you move them all the time. So that process goes forward. And then on managed hiring, we've been very strict on managed hiring. The only people that are getting through the exemption process are those that are consistent with the council instruction, where they have full cost recovery on anything that they have. So specific grants, specific fees that are full cost recovery. And then on those, even on those places, for example, we approved a couple of accountants in Housing Department. Housing Department is full cost recovery. But we said, you can fill them, but you got to transfer them. You can't go to the open list and bring in new people from the outside.
So the mistake we made probably is that when we said we were taking 3,000 people off the payroll, we always thought that bumping would happen and that people would bump up, but sooner or later somebody would be bumped off the payroll. That's not the case.
Well, that's not the case at the moment.
Because they go sideways within the organization.
That's not the case at the moment, but it will be once the departments come back with the staffing plans to accommodate the shared responsibility and sacrifice. Because when that occurs, that's where the dollar value of the budget is going to be layered onto the existing staffing structure. At the moment,
but we always assumed that there was three components. One, we're talking about an ERIP. Two, we're talking about people out of the system gone, numbers of people no longer on the payroll. And three would be shared responsibility, which was a 10% dollar amount. Now you're saying that if somebody moves across the organization, we're still assuming the 10%, but the body's not gone.
The body's not gone, but for the department,
yeah, the 10% is 10%.
10% is gone. And so in the next round, remember the timing. The timing on this was when we got into budget and finance, we agreed to eliminate these 1,589 positions early in the process, and then the departments went to work on those immediately. And so that's why you see some of the changes that came later, which is how the 1,500 got whittled down by council adding positions back and those things. So, and then the impact of the new positions. So where we will see reductions is when departments have to reconcile the shared responsibility item with their existing staffing structure. And while they haven't moved forward yet on this 400 list, that's not going to be the driving issue. What's going to be the driving issue is the 10%, and that's where you will see significant numbers coming back on the general fund funded portion of the budget.
For a short moment.
Exactly. And actually,
Made it more
unless we have an alternate solution, they made it worse.
But let me just ask Maggie, that 42 million that I heard before from the controller, which is this increase, this raise, so to speak, or COLA, wouldn't it be a bit insane if a person gets that raise today and gets laid off tomorrow, or furloughed or something? I mean, this $42 million it's crazy.
Well, and that's something that the CAO has been dealing with as far as negotiating with the bargaining units.
I mean, no offense, if I was a worker and I'm being told that I might be laid off, but we're giving you a raise today and you're going to be laid off tomorrow, I mean, it would be hard for a person to appreciate that.
I agree.
So how do we tackle that in a way that respects our workers, especially those that might be furloughed or laid off?
Well, I think that again, this is something that the CAO has been working with the various bargaining units in order to address the city's overall shortfall.
But we're just about 3 days from D-Day on that, correct?
We're pretty close. Yeah.
But for our accounting purposes, we said these 400 positions is going to result in how much of a savings? Does anybody remember that amount?
No, I don't remember that off the top of my head.
That's in our next year's budget, so that's there.
Yeah,
Okay,
that number.
whatever amount that
is. That number has been taken out of next year's.
So that's there. That we've accounted for that for next year's budget. And now we see an 80 that actually happened, and that could fluctuate. So what does that do to our accounting for our budgetary purposes for next year?
That money is still gone.
That contributes to the cash burn problem the controller is talking about.
Yeah, so that it was, so it's not a balanced budget.
That money is gone out of the budget, but we're spending it because the people are still here.
That money is gone out of the budget, and it is possible that with the addition of the new positions and the positions that were added back, that the departments would have been able to accommodate that 400 with vacancies, because we continue to have vacancies. People continue to retire. So there is some movement.
And
so, as I say, in a normal budget year, and we did this last year. You know, last year we eliminated 776 positions. Some of them were filled at the point in time where we eliminated the positions, and by the time we finished, we laid off one person. So here we've eliminated 1,600. We thought maybe 400 were filled, but that was always an estimate. And then we've added back 189 through the council process, and we've added back some new positions. And so that number shrinks, and then there's people leaving. And departments, having spent a long time in departments...
But how much are we talking about this? Because this 400 to 80, how much millions are we talking about? Because should we take some real directive action from this committee and council to say, departments, I don't care how you interpreted this, we allocated this amount in next year's budget. And we're telling you, go back and fix it, because you're costing us, I don't know, I'm trying to get to a number, $40 million.
That money is clearly gone.
Okay, and how much was it? Do we know?
No, I don't know the exact number for what these...
And I'm thinking, if we have that much of a gap for next year's budget, or even it's affecting our cash flow to the extent it is, and I'm trying to figure out the magnitude of this problem, we have no option but to go back to our departments and tell them, fix this. No matter how you interpret this, or no matter, what you've done historically, you're not going to do it this time. And is it 5 million? Okay, so let's figure it out. But is it 40 million? No, let's get serious here today and do something, give some real directive.
These 400 positions, down to 80 at the moment, it's really a function of which department by department. Because in a small department, if I've lost 3 positions, but I only have 10 to begin with, that's a real problem for me. If I lose 10 positions out of the Department of General Services, I'll take my chances. I mean, I think I can accommodate that. But what I can't accommodate this year is the shared responsibility and sacrifice item, because I'm already 10% under, plus whatever my salary savings rate is. So when the departments come back with the staffing plans to accommodate the 10% shared responsibility and sacrifice line item, that's when you will see massive numbers of layoffs associated with them.
If I may, I think a good example is the Personnel Department lost 24 positions, but we had enough vacancies that were funded that we were able to avoid having to lay anybody off in that round. But I think, as Tom says, with the 10%, that absolutely, that will result in layoffs, and that's where I think...
The other difficulty here is just, and some of us were asking for these lists up front, it's very difficult up front to say, we're going to get rid of 400 filled positions and not know what that is. And that's kind of, that was, it's difficult to say that up front. We're always asking through this budget process, what's going to be the service cut, right? It's okay, you're going to cut this, or even, whether it's a person or something else, we're going to cut administrative, whatever it is, we're always saying, what's the service cut? It's very difficult going through this process, not knowing that up front. I don't know if we could have seen a list like that, but that certainly could have avoided all this altogether, not only us knowing what the service cut was going to be, but also whether we're going to have the result we wanted to at the end of the day. Because it was very difficult sitting there doing this. And then to not have the effect we wanted, but we took the consequence, both financially and politically, it's a very difficult decision to make, relying on this. And so I just don't think we should let this pass up. We got to...
And Mr. Parks and I were just talking about it. I think we really need to issue a warning letter from the CAOs to all general managers saying, don't assume that this little trick is going to help you, it's going to hurt you.
Right.
And that we say as a committee that on the mid-year FSR, or whenever we choose, that we are not going to fix your budget for you this year. There will be no transfers in if you've overspent your payroll budget. We're not going to fix it for you. So if you come into the mid-year FSR and you're $10 million out of whack from what you were supposed to be, general manager, we're taking $20 million out because you have to balance for the year. I mean, this has got to be the tough love letter. we're not going to bail you out this year. There are no transfers in mid-year to fix your budget problems. We can't let them get away with that.
One of my problems on top of it's going to be those revenue-generating positions that exist now that not only pay for themselves, but assist us going forward. I really don't want to see a layoff of a person who's a meter maid that's collecting the coins out of the meter. I mean, just as a minor, I mean, that is an example of a revenue-generating position. Have we taken an analysis when we say the 10% or this or that, which are revenue-generating positions, and we should kind of have an appreciation of that in the context before we lay off someone that not only pays for themselves, but pays for the general treasury? Have we done any analysis on that?
Well, one of the things that's very important is there's got to be a constant dialogue with the departments.
Yeah.
The departments know which of their positions are revenue or which of their classifications collect revenue. And so decisions that are made as it relates to changes in their programs that has to be a priority.
And do we appreciate when we do the 10% cut that revenue-generating positions wouldn't get that cut if not only do they pay for themselves, but obviously generate more revenue for us, or are we just saying sorry?
Yes.
Well,
the CAO is working with departments to identify those positions, so that will be coming forward as we move forward with which positions are identified for layoff. But we are working with departments to come up with those numbers. It's just that right now, we do have the revenue numbers as far as which departments generate revenues. There's different types of revenues.
Yeah, like building and safety does, parking enforcement does, parking meters,
But on the positions that generate fees, on those, of course, within the fee, there's embedded the overhead cost. So right now, we're just working to come up with a methodology to be able to isolate the direct cost, to be able to identify the salaries that go along with the fees that they're collecting.
But I would like to be clear that we're talking about classifications. When we have a layoff, it's within a classification. So you may have 5 positions within a class. 3 of them may work on jobs where they collect revenue, but when the layoff occurs, it's based on seniority. So you can't pick individuals within a job classification that you're going to protect at the expense of the others, because it is based on seniority.
And nor do you get to pick assignments. Within the traffic officer function, for example, not every single traffic officer writes tickets all day long.
Right.
You have other traffic officers that do other functions. Now, those functions, if the Department of Transportation says, I'm going to keep all my ticket writing people, but I'm going to cut because I need to cut some number of traffic officers, then they will propose traffic officer cuts. Where that actually hits on a per person basis will be everywhere in the organization within the traffic officer function. It won't be limited just to the place where they were not generating revenue. But that function, the non-revenue generating function, will probably be gone.
Another question, I know this isn't the appropriate team up here, but revenue-generating strategies going forward is something we obviously need to talk about. For instance, a guy came up to me yesterday and he said, all of our gardeners in the city of Santa Monica have licenses. There's no licensing for gardeners in the city of L.A. A guy came up to me from Beverly Hills and he said, all valet parking has a license. And so I just thought, there are 2 potential revenue streams. Is there anybody in the room here who can work on that? We can look into that? I'd like to make a motion right now that we look into both gardeners and
Just do a paper thing tomorrow.
Okay. Great. Got to find some money.
But the thing is, I think we do need a letter from the CAO about these issues. The other thing is, I don't think we can wait to mid-year. I think we have to deal with it on the first FSR, because the longer we wait, the more harsh it gets. But they've manipulated the numbers that will come back to haunt them, because they're overspending what they don't have. And when most people that paid attention to the budget realized that they cut all their vacant positions, then they had a 3 to 5% salary savings. And then on top of that, they had a 10% shared responsibility. So anyone that moved positions in with that understanding would clearly know that they didn't have the money. They may have saved somebody's job for 2 minutes, but they just created havoc down the road.
And, we can certainly make that clear in our next communication to departments, because, we completely agree that if we're using the traditional tools for a non-traditional problem, we're setting ourselves up to fail.
And it wasn't an easy decision, but we did it, and we might as well implement it after we made that decision. But it's also helpful. A lot of us were asking to see that list and have it come back, and that's just as important. We wanted to see, in terms of service cuts and the,
And that's going to be the real challenge. When you get back this list that identifies how departments are going to manage that 10% shared responsibility item, if we can't find any other way to address it through labor or whatever, that service list is going to be, it's going to be very challenging.
And the sooner we see it, the better.
And that's
We know we've got
due to the 26th to the mayor, as I recall.
The 24th is due to the mayor and the CAO.
But see, the only other alternative, you'll be bankrupt.
I'm-
I mean, that's where we are. Let me just say, on item 20, we'll hold that item for continued updates, but report dated June the 15th by the CAO regarding potential layoffs. We will waive that out of committee to get it to council. If there's any additional information that is forthcoming, if you could provide that between now and when this is scheduled, and that way we could give the council as in-depth an analysis of that 400 to 80 and what some of the alternatives might be. Do we have any other items?
Can I ask a question? As far as updates for this committee, what kind of information do you want from the Personnel Department as it relates to updating you on the status?
I think, Maggie, one of the things I think we need is a general education in the sense of the layoff system, because I don't think there's a clear understanding of that. And I think we talked about it at the last Budget and Finance, the resources that it's going to require, because the longer it takes you to move people off the payroll, the more it costs us in the sense of not realizing the savings. And then this accounting for the council to say 80 people have been moved off the payroll, 20 people have been, those are the accountings that we need. The CAO will capture the dollar issue, but until they begin to see numbers and where those numbers might be coming from, it's not a reality.
Okay.
That's what I would think. Anybody else? Okay. Any other items?
No, that concludes the agenda.
So we'll adjourn. No other cards. Thank you.